Good evening, everybody. My name is Walker Evans. I serve as the library director here, and I'm honored to welcome all of you to the Andrew Carnegie Free Library and Music Hall, a beautiful and historic building that has been serving the residents of Carnegie for 124 years. We know that this is largely a country of immigrants that we live in. Carnegie is no exception. I feel very fortunate to work in such an increasingly diverse community here. In my time with the library, it's been very important to me that we proactively welcome, support, and learn from our immigrant and refugee neighbors. Tonight's program is a part of that continuing mission. I've been very lucky to collaborate on a few projects in the past with Dr. David Rosenberg, a co-founder of the Pittsburgh Darfur Emergency Coalition. Earlier this year, as we were both feeling distraught over the abrupt elimination of USAID funding, he suggested holding a panel discussion here to bring broader attention to this important loss. It's taken a lot of planning to get to this point, and tonight's event would not at all be possible without an immense amount of support. I especially would like to thank the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh and ANSAR of Pittsburgh. The expertise, experience, compassion, and connections shared by both of these partner organizations was truly invaluable. At this time, I'd like to introduce the originator of tonight's program. David is an academic and an activist, not to mention a former librarian, dear to my heart. He has been instrumental at every step along the road of planning this event, and I couldn't thank him enough. I hope you'll join me in welcoming Dr. David Rosenberg.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to this event. As Walker mentioned, I've been the volunteer coordinator of the Pittsburgh Darfur Emergency Coalition, PDEC, for a number of years. Our mission has been to raise awareness about the ongoing genocide and displacement in Sudan and South Sudan, places which have witnessed hundreds of thousands of deaths in the last 2 decades. In our advocacy work, we have been acutely aware of the essential importance of humanitarian organizations in saving refugees and internally displaced persons from disease and starvation. Because of this, news of the termination of USAID landed with a particular shock. With the blizzard of other issues confronting people closer to home, attention to the fate of USAID is likely to seem a luxury. But we have responsibilities beyond our borders to people who have been depending on us for life-saving humanitarian assistance. The fact that the targeting of USAID occurred at the very beginning of the new administration has no doubt contributed to making its demise seem less present and less catastrophic. The idea of a forum struck me and colleagues in the Darfur Coalition as a good way of trying to bring this issue to the fore. John Prendergast, one of our panel of experts for tonight's program and a longtime friend, committed early on to be a speaker and brought along Colin Thomas Jensen, a former top USAID administrator. Another Sudan advocate, Esther Sprague, helped us reach out to Neon Gile of South Sudan Women United. Walker Evans, director of the library with whom I previously had worked on several historical exhibits, was immediately supportive of this proposal when he and I started to talk about it in early May, as was the executive director of the Carnegie Library and Music Hall, Marley Gallagher. Together, they offered to make available this beautiful music hall space to host the event. Betty Cruz brought her deep experience and the organizational heft of the World Affairs Council and its talented staff to bear on the enterprise. William Yunus of ANSAR, an immigrant aid organization in Carnegie and a storyteller in our upcoming panel, has been an active participant in the planning and a generous sponsor. Kevin Cox, Mary Dawn Edwards, Karantim and Kosar Albe, who catered the refreshments this evening, which I regrettably did not get to eat, and Benedict Kilang, also a storyteller, members of the Darfur Coalition, past and present, contributed in various ways to the result. Even apart from the forum itself, I think the act of contacting local and national political representatives with notices of this event and posing some pertinent questions probably served as a helpful reminder to them of the problems that are out there, even if not always top of mind. As I followed the literature on the termination of USAID, these are some observations I made. There seemed to be some questions, at least initially, as to the legal authority of the administration's actions in terminating USAID and moving the non-terminated programs into the State Department. But after an early ruling requiring the administration to pay obligated program funds, court decisions have unfortunately been supportive of broad presidential discretion. A second point, with decisions abruptly made and abruptly revoked, it is difficult to grasp what programs have been terminated and which are still active. In March, Secretary Rubio announced that 5,200 of the agency's 6,200 programs, 83%, had been eliminated. Following some communication with a helpful staff person in a congressional office, I was able to procure a spreadsheet running to 218 pages listing the terminated and non-terminated programs and their funding status as of the end of March. If anybody wants a link to this particular spreadsheet, please see me after the event or contact me, and I'll be glad to forward it to you. In some cases, however, it feels like follow the bouncing ball. For instance, PEPFAR, the Bush administration's signature anti-AIDS program, had its funding frozen during Trump's initial 90-day foreign aid freeze. Then it received a waiver, an exemption from the freeze, when former President Bush appealed to Secretary Rubio. The program was then threatened again with loss of funding as part of a rescission package until that funding was restored by a vote of Congress. Impact on beneficiaries. An essential focus of tonight's proceedings is the impact of the cuts on beneficiary populations. While media have published anecdotal reports of these impacts, there have also been attempts to come to grips with the impacts in their totality. In July, I came across a study in Lancet, the British Journal of Medicine, about the past benefits of USAID and the future impact of the cuts. An international research team with investigators from Brazil, Spain, and the U.S. modeled a retrospective examination of USAID's probable benefit in terms of reducing mortality during the 20 years between 2001 and 2021. Studying population and mortality statistics across 133 countries and comparing countries receiving low, medium, and high amounts of aid, they concluded that USAID programs were likely responsible for 90 million fewer deaths from disease and malnutrition during that period than would have otherwise occurred. Then, turning their lens toward the future, the researchers posit a range of between 8 million and 19 million excess deaths if the current Trump administration cuts remained in place for the next 5 years. A figure of 14 million excess deaths by 2030 is the one that is stuck as a kind of midpoint mortality projection resulting from this study. 14 million excess deaths by 2030 is the midpoint mortality projection resulting from this study. Yet in hearings before the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee this past May, Secretary Rubio had insisted that, quote, no one had died because of the cuts. Disconfirming individual cases have already been brought to light by Nicholas Kristof and other journalists. Studies like The Lancet's tell a hugely different story that will necessarily be realized if we do not change course. To read The Lancet study for yourself, search on USAID Lancet, Lancet, or Lancet, L-A-N-C-T, USAID. We now come to the point in this evening's program where we will hear from the storytellers, 3 community leaders, immigrants themselves, who are dedicated to helping other newcomers adjust and prosper in our region. Each has a story to tell about their lives and values, and each will explain ways in which USAID has played its part in them. I can just separate these pages. I will conclude. Oh, the joys of it. They are Dr. William Yunus, founder and CEO of Ansar, Benedict Kilang, Senior Program Officer at Global Refuge, and Yvonne Smith Tapia, Director of Refugee and Immigrant Services, Jewish Family and Children's Services. They will appear before you one at a time to share their unique experiences. Later, we will go deeper into some of the issues with our panel of experts moderated by Betty Cruz. And now it's my honor to welcome William Yunus to the podium.
Good, David.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and listening to some of our stories. My name is William Yunus, and I am the CEO of Allied Network for Social Assistance and Resources, Ansar. We are located here in Carnegie. When I was approached to talk about USAID, I didn't know what I'm going to be talking about because I know so many projects that impacted many people and many lives across the world, whether it is about small businesses for women in Jordan, whether about Kenya for a camp with girls that now they cannot even buy pads to go to school during, certain days of the month, or, talking about a personal experience when I lived in Pakistan. So I decided to talk about personal experience. In early 1990s, I moved with my family to Lahore, Pakistan. Lahore was the capital of India before it was, 3 countries, which is India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And it was still called the educational and the cultural city of Pakistan. So when I moved there, my ex-husband at that time, a nephrologist, wanted to have a transplant program and dialysis unit across Lahore and in Punjab province. That's why we moved there. We bought a house, and he decided to have his clinic and dialysis unit on the 2nd floor, and we lived on the 1st floor. That was my first introduction to a lot of things. One of them is something called electrical load shedding, which means that you don't have electricity certain time of the day. And in summer, which when you are in June with the highest 102 and the lowest is 81 degrees, you don't have it, Most of the time you don't have electricity at all. So it's hot. You need electricity, at least for a fan, if not air conditioner. I lived in a 4-bedroom house, so I needed 4 ACs and, of course, living room. But buying the largest generator that we can afford in Pakistan at that time could not power the whole house, especially if I want to put AC. The only thing that could power dialysis machines and the AC on the 2nd floor, and me and my 4 kids later had to sit in one room with a fan until we had electricity. And there wasn't an internet for us to go to and find out when is going to be load shedding, and they are very efficient that they're going to tell us when there's going to be load shedding. No, you could be cooking or doing something and in the heat, and then suddenly you don't have electricity. And I still consider myself a very lucky person because with load shedding, we can still afford a fan. We can sit in some kind of a cool, area where our other people who could not even afford to run a fan. Pakistan has 250 plus million people living there. 70.8% are poverty or under poverty line. And we are talking poverty line, we are not talking the United States standards poverty line. It's way much lower than that. $100 can support a family there. So you can imagine, these people will live large family in one shack, I can't say bedroom, some of them, and they cannot even run electricity in this heat. So of course you have a lot of death because of heat waves in monsoon season in the summer. USAID. Now let's talk about USAID. I came to know two of the people that worked with me when I was in Pakistan. Let me give you that I was part of the American Women Club on the board there. So two of the ladies that part of the American Women Club there, their husbands worked in a project supported by USAID to support in building the capacity of electricity in Lahore and the Punjab province. It's a multifaceted project over the years. The one that I was connected or came to know about, and I couldn't remember it, so I have to write it, is Tarbella hydropower. That was in early 1992, 1993 or 4. So during that time, what happens? United States gave aid to Pakistan, to the ministry, which called WAPDA, and for them to slowly increase the power capacity. So this project brought, now this is what we do. We are not giving the whole money to Pakistan and saying, oh, go ahead and increase it. No, we have to send experts. So contractors, US-based contractors or Europeans contract with the US government for them to start building that capacity. So they go in and then they start, helping small local businesses that they contract, and then they start building that capacity or increasing, providing training, provide consultation, expertise. It's a multi-year. So during that time, I came to know a couple of the people, Americans, who came in this project, contractors. They came with their children. Their children were in American school. American schools, at that time, every year it's $15,000 per child. And then one ticket going back, every year to United States, paying housing, transportation, cars, everything for them. So the money, the majority of it goes to contractors that will help WAPDA. But after a couple of years in that project, they were able with the first phase to improve, not completely, but improve the capacity of electricity for 2 million people. Now remember, I said 245 million. They improved the first phase of 2 million people. We still got load shedding. Okay, improved it a little bit, but we still got load shedding, okay? Now, think about all these people. We are talking about necessity. The other project was to build a dam so they can also increase the capacity for two things. First, for electricity. Second, to eliminate all the flooding that happens in monsoon season and kills hundreds and hundreds of people who live around the river. So USAID was important. It was important for people who are here working in other countries and learning about the culture and also giving their expertise. It was very important for the poor people that they are getting necessity of electricity and control of the water instead of, of death. But you may ask yourself, why would USAID invest in power and electricity in Pakistan? Okay? Why would we do that? Why we are giving these multi-million, multi-year projects to a country like Pakistan or any other country around the world? Well, it's a give and take relationship. Pakistan in the from 1979 to 1980, I think 9, they were helping United States combat the Russia that is trying to enter Afghanistan and control that region. So Pakistan was helping United States aid the Mujahideen then so they can fight Russia and its allies in Afghanistan. So that's one. Intelligence in the area. Pakistan provides the most intensive intelligence. It is very close to Afghanistan, and it's very close to Iran. It borders Iran and it borders in Afghanistan beside India and other countries. So it's very important to gather intelligence and share intelligence. The other thing also, I can go on and on and on. At the time of the Taliban also, and the time of Al-Qaeda, Pakistan played a vital role in allowing U.S. to fly from its bases, and they run all to this date exercises of the naval. So we do have interest politically with Pakistan, and at the same time, we help them by giving them these projects that are helping people. It did not eliminate it. After a while, United States closed and is not continuing with this multi-year project. So right now, the project of continuing provide electricity stopped. We are not providing any more help and any more expertise to Pakistan to do that. And a lot of people are struggling at this moment with not having electricity and load shedding. So with that, thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you visit Carnegie more often. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Benedict Kila, and I am one of the Sudanese community leaders in Greater Pittsburgh region. And I'm going to share with you the stories about the impact of these cuts again in Africa, but specifically in Sudan and South Sudan. Sudan, as I am speaking to you, has become a case study for the impact of USAID cut. One of the aid workers said that was what these are people who are working on the ground. Funding gaps amid civil war, as I'm quite sure most of you know, leaves about 60%, that's about 30 million of the population in need of assistance. According to the data from the UN and USAID, UN specifically, USAID provided 44% of the world's humanitarian funding in 2024 to Sudan. That's only USAID. Leave about UK, leave about other countries, but that's only USAID, 44%, and that's the highest. So let's get to some of these stories to relate to what this means when USAID funding is cut. A coalition known as a mutual aid stood up emergency clinics and soups kitchens that became a lifeline for Sudanese during the civil war, the current civil war. That was one of those instrumental, doing all that work, helping people out. It was a lifeline, And this coalition was receiving nearly 80% of the funding from USAID. Now let us look at what happened when now abruptly the aid is cut off. So when the White House on President Donald Trump's first day in office freeze all U.S. assistance abroad from what this agency was doing, 1,500 of the kitchens in Sudan closed almost immediately, just that first day. 1,500 kitchens closed, So the pain from the cuts being felt most acutely, especially in the health sector, That was the lifeline, health center. So where medicine is not moving the way it used to be, USAID, when agencies get aid from USAID, they also partner with other agencies that do business with UK or other countries. But then, when the major one, that was the USAID, was cut, imagine what happened. The other agencies could not do anything because, this medical, when you deal with medication, it has a very different components. It has different chain of components. So when one is cut, then it affected almost all. All the other sects break down. So, and this was very catastrophic to not only, to the health center, but to health services, but also to all other services, to all other agencies. Let us look, for example, at the crossing border. At the Tina border point of Chad, east of violent-plagued Darfur region of Sudan, the cuts are impossible to miss. You cannot miss that cuts, said one of the aid coordinators. You cannot miss, you can see that from the people that are crossing. So what they do, instead of now helping everybody, they look at the critical, those ones who are really in their need, to help them. But the others that are not, then that is not really what they have to look at. They look at those ones that are really down. And this was what the MSF, was doing, because they don't have enough. So what they will have to do is to concentrate what they have, the little they have, is to look at those people who really are really in critical need. But the others were, of course, forgotten. So again, for those who don't know what MSF is an independent and donor-funded. It has nothing to do with USAID funding, so it was not directly affected. But again, indirectly, they depend on other agencies that depend on USAID. Again, one of the examples I would like also to share with you is that, when you look at the refugees that are crossing into Chad from Sudan, that are crossing barefooted, going to Chad, looking for refuge, and between Sudan and Chad, especially from the Darfur side of it, it is a desert. And at this point in time, the temperatures are 110 degrees. People arrive by foot in Chad, having spent a day with no shelter, no food, not even water. Refugees congregate and stay under trees with no sense of hope, but hopelessness and despair. And this was all because of the cuts. It was not, and it has never been like that before. Agent support, the risk of famine and further deterioration remains extremely, very, very high up to this point. Another example that I would like to share with you. Normally, the people that have crossed, that was, what the aid agencies put was about maybe 18,000 that they will be crossing to Chad through Tina, should have had like 350 latrines or toilets. That was what was expected, that maybe 18,000 will cross, then we will have about 350 toilets. But that was not the case. At this point, they were seeing about over 20,000 people crossing to Chad. And you know how many latrines? Only 9 latrines. You can imagine that. Again, we're not going to stop there, but also we need to know that USAID, in fact, also is felt not only in North Sudan, but the youngest nation, and that was South Sudan. South Sudan was pushed into uncharted territory. This is a young nation, but because of these cuts, they don't even know what to do. Leave aside, man-made disasters, intercommunal conflicts, political uncertainties, and much more. In April alone, 8 people died of diarrhea. Trying to find medical treatment after USAID funded clinics in Jonglei State were shut down. Healthcare services at the transit, because it is at the border. So you have these clinics here that was funded by USAID, but also there were also some at the border that helps also people who are crossing from North Sudan to South Sudan. So they said, okay, these ones are closed, maybe we will have, we still maybe have some lifeline on the other, clinics. But that was not the case. That was not the case. Healthcare services at the transit centers receiving people fleeing the war in Sudan have also stopped. So people have nowhere to go. One of the local agencies called Your Care South Sudan is a local organization serving about 10,000 people with its HIV/AIDS programming alone. 10,000. The impact was swift and devastating. Nearly 1,000 women lost access to the medication they needed to survive. Another 9,000 people were stripped of the testing, preventative treatment, and healthcare services they had relied on for years. People and children are dying at unprecedented rate every single day. Because of the cuts, this local agency had tons and tons of medication in their store. But then, because of the cuts, everyone is gone. So 5 tons of health commodities have sat frozen in your care clinics because no one was working. Everyone is gone. So all those were all frozen. And now the agency has been forced to lay off more than 90% of its staff. Before you standing here today, talking to people in Sudan and South Sudan, you can feel and hear their desperation. Wherever we look in Sudan and South Sudan, you will find humanitarian and medical needs. All these needs are overwhelming, urgent, and unfortunately unmet. A majority of the weight is being laid on some of us who are in diaspora, where some of us have to work 2 to 3 jobs so that we can support and help family members and relatives. And also the burden goes to some of the local NGOs that are down there, and then the community that is hosting them. Because if they run from Sudan, at least there are some communities at the border that they will also stay, Then the burden lays on those kind of communities as well. These dramatic overnight cuts were unprecedented and deadly. An experiment in relation to aid spending, which will have a catastrophic effects on the lives of those who depend on it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Smith-Tapia, and today I want to tell you a story that changed forever the way I see international aid. I was in my mid-20s, starting my second professional job, and I found myself standing in a farm field, a notebook in hand, looking for children who weren't there. But let me back up. For over 30 years, Colombia has been the largest recipient of international aid in Latin America. A lot of that funding has been towards fighting the war on drugs. Other millions of dollars have been dedicated to implement programs to help vulnerable communities. Those programs created jobs, including mine, which I'm very grateful for. Thanks to international cooperation from US, Canada, and Sweden, I was able to build my professional career and implement programs that helped many people. One of those programs were implemented by a very recognized international nonprofit. I was hired to use and implement those US funding to find children working in flower farms and bring them back to school. I was very surprised. I was born in Colombia, and I didn't know child labor was part of the flower industry. Flowers are one of the most important exports from Colombia. But I was about to be surprised again. After I started the job and I did hours of field work, interview many local leaders, educators, politicians, people working in that field, we were surprised. There was no child labor in the flower industry. None. My negative side thought, well, now I have to go and find a job again. But then my positive side thought, we're going to pivot. That preliminary data allows us to see that there were many problems that families and children in that industry were facing. But that never happened. The money was earmarked to fight child labor in the flower industry and child laborhood address, whether it existed or not. So we try to do our best. We adapt as much as possible so that we focus on education. We talk to teachers. We start about positive discipline practices so then children wouldn't ever think of dropping out of school and then work on the fields. But this is what stuck with me. Who made this decision? Who decided that the child labor was a problem in the flower industry in Colombia? But this is the thing. This is not about one industry, one program, one country. This is about how international aid sometimes works. Aid is often driven by the idea that American security depends on the progress and stability of other nations. And sometimes that works beautifully, but other times it doesn't. When decisions are made thousands of miles away, without local voices at the table, we end up with well-intended people implemented programs to address problems that don't exist. And those decisions sometimes create new problems. And we saw that clearly here close to home. January 17 of 2025, the federal government decided to stop the refugee resettlement programs. The administration decided that local communities didn't have the capacity to welcome new refugees, that we needed to prioritize our safety and security instead of bringing people that we didn't know. That decision wasn't backed up by data. There are many, many reports that time after time have shown that refugees make our economy stronger and enrich our communities. It didn't matter that we promised support and help to refugees around the world to start a new chapter of their lives here in the United States. It didn't matter that people were traveling. Their lives were stopped. They were very upended. In all of these pictures, local resettlement agencies, local communities, local officials were never consulted. The decision was made. So now we are at a crossroads. We have a great opportunity, a unique opportunity, to think of what is the system that we want to have. How should cooperation and aid should look like? We can continue to implement a top-down system where well-intended individuals implement programs to decide how other people need to solve their problems. Or we can create a better system, a system that is true, it's built in true partnerships, where local talent drives investment and American resources are used to implement sustainable solutions that are going to address the problems that local nations want to address. I know which world I want to live in. I've been there. I know what happens when we don't listen. So I hope that all of us advocate for a better system, a system that invests in people, that recognize the local talent, and the lived experience of many people around the world that we claim to serve. Thank you.
Many thanks to each of our storytellers for sharing these powerful words. It's now my honor to introduce the distinguished members of our panel, as well as moderator Betty Cruz of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh.
All right. Thank you so much to our storytellers, not only for sharing their stories with us, but for the work they do every day supporting immigrants and refugees. Can we give them another round of applause? Now it's my pleasure to be in conversation with this incredible panel. My name is Betty Cruz with the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, and I'm grateful to be able to moderate this important conversation in this difficult time. Rather than reading bios, I'd like to invite each of you to take a moment and help us understand your work, the path that led you to it, and the efforts that you're leading today. Khalid, can you get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Betty, and thanks for World Affairs Council and Carnegie Library for hosting this. So I'll kind of start up what I do now, and I'll work backward to tell you how I got here. So I worked at USAID up until January 20th, 2025. That was my last day in the job as a political appointee. And I was very fortunate, I am very fortunate, unlike thousands of my colleagues who were fired and let go in the cruelest sort of ways. I was able to land a job at a place called the Humanitarian Initiative, which is an organization founded in of the memory of the Armenian genocide and focused on supporting local humanitarians, so much like kind of people we were just hearing about, individuals in very small organizations around the world, mostly in conflict zones, and providing frontline humanitarian care, often in places that when and in places that international organizations are not present. So very different from my job at USAID. My career, and I'll work quickly, my background academically is in Africa, and I did a study abroad in 1995 in Kenya. I got the Africa bug. Rwanda was something that was very visceral at the time in terms of, as an activist, as someone who's interested in social justice, seeing Rwanda unfold, hearing about that, and then traveling to the continent. I got the bug. I decided to join the Peace Corps. But there was actually a moment I was thinking about it. Before I went to Peace Corps, between college and Peace Corps, I saw a television in 1998 on 60 Minutes. It was Christiane Amanpour, who wasn't always just CNN, she did 60 Minutes, doing a story on the Lord's Resistance Army, which is a millenarian rebel group, started in northern Uganda. Eventually, its atrocities stretched into South Sudan, Eastern Congo, Central African Republic. And the story was about children who'd been forced by the leader of this army to commit atrocities against civilians. And one of the things that they were forced to do is cut off the lips of people who were informing on the LRA leadership to the Ugandan army. And so this image is still stuck in my head of people without lips. That kids had done nice things, people, and it, as someone who's, parents were hippies, who grew up as an activist working in low-income communities, I was just floored that human beings were capable of doing this to one another. And sadly, over 20 years, it's become apparent that we're capable of that a lot more. But that was the moment I think that really got me interested in doing humanitarian and human rights work. After Peace Corps, I went, my first job was actually with USAID, and I was in Darfur, working on Darfur Agrarian Genocide. I was there from 2003 to 2004. And then I decided that humanitarian assistance was a Band-Aid, and I needed to do more. I needed to try to figure out, is there more I can do to actually solve these conflicts and prevent these kinds of atrocities from happening? So I joined a think tank. I did a lot of research. I wrote a lot of op-eds and commentaries about how horrible the U.S. administration's policies were all around the world. And then when Obama was elected, I decided to, rather than sit and continue to throw stones and argue for new policies, I tried to go into government and try to be a part of making these policies myself. So I was very fortunate to work for the Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan for 3 years. That was during the time of South Sudan's elections, then independence from Sudan, and then a long series of negotiations. South Sudan and Sudan separated in 2011, but they got divorced without a separation agreement. They had no agreement on borders, they had no agreement on currency, they had no agreement on citizenship issues, so we had to negotiate that a lot to get back. I then lucked out and went to work at U.S. Mission in the United Nations for former Ambassador Samantha Power. And that was where my career really veered to do more work in national security, peacekeeping, counterterrorism, kind of the full scope of working on U.S. foreign policy, and was very fortunate to enjoy my time working for Ambassador Power, and was very fortunate to be invited by her to work for her again, and she became administrator of USAID. So I served in that agency for 4 years as her national security advisor. And so I basically hopped from crisis to crisis, working on everything from developing USAID positions and policies on certain issues to coordinating different bureaus and building to mount an effective policy and humanitarian response. My coming back and doing humanitarian work now, particularly after having lived through, suffered through what I think was a really horrific foreign policy of the Biden administration, to be now working directly with field humanitarians who are helping saving lives around the world is exactly what I want to be doing. And so I'm very fortunate and excited to be here to talk about USAID and where to go next with foreign assistance.
Very good. Very good. Good evening, people of Pittsburgh. Mr. Norbert Rosenberg, thank you so much for organizing this beautiful event. And I'm so happy to be among Americans, my friends, the friends of Sudan and South Sudan. My name is Sheikh Hamida. I'm the co-founder of South Sudan Women United. It's a humanitarian organization that we founded in 2013 when the war broke in South Sudan, the civil war broke in South Sudan in 2013. My friend Esther Spry and Ambassador Agnes Usoha and I came together and we said, now the war broke in South Sudan, women and children are the victims, so what do we do? So we thought of forming this small organization to support the victims of the war. So we worked with these women for a while until 2023, when war broke in Sudan again. So now we came back again and we said, we thought we were over with the war in South Sudan. At that time, the war in South Sudan was known to have displaced so many people. It was the biggest displacement around that time. But now the war started in Sudan, which became the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. So we thought of, what do we do again? We thought we were done with South Sudan, and now it's Sudan. We were contacted by Sudanese that were in the middle of war in 2023, and they were calling us to come and help them out, take them out of the war. We didn't know how to do that because war was raging, warring parties were everywhere, risky situation. So what do we do? So we contacted our friend, her name is Pamela Omidia, and told her about what is happening. And she gladly said, I will help you guys. I will help you. What do you need? So we told her, all it takes is trucks. Right now, where the airports are shut down, all we need is small funding, and then we'll figure it out. So we went into Sudan, to Khartoum, in the middle of war, and we went door to door to make sure that nobody was left behind. So we evacuated 15,000 people using trucks, boats. At some point, we were using donkeys for distances that you cannot rifle, small boats, tractors. We brought these people to different parts of Sudan and South Sudan. So our work did not end there. We said, now we brought people out of Sudan to South Sudan, a country that is already fragile, that has so many IDPs from its own war. What do we do? So we thought of, let's establish a women's center where all these women that are coming out of war can come together, cry together, heal together, and see what other services that we can do for their children that are dying as well. So we established a women's center that is currently supporting 1,200 women and children, and that is in the border of Sudan, a place called Ran. So when the funding was cut, we said, where do we go? Because a large majority of our funding was coming from USAID. We had some funding coming from the State Department, where we had a program that was supporting these women that were coming out of the war zone. And in the middle of our program for protection of women, the funding is frozen. What do we do? We became stranded. We don't know where else to go. We went back to the very same person that helped us and told her, Mrs. Media, we're coming back to you. If you can help us to support our centers. And this is an example of friends like you people that are sitting here. I'm sure you guys came here to listen to our stories, what happened when the United States decided to cut funding. What happened to countries like Sudan, countries like South Sudan, countries that have been depending on the US aid for a very, very long time. I was born in war, and I grew up in war, and now I have children in war. Luckily, my kids are born here in the United States, but there are kids that are born in Sudan and South Sudan that were dependent on this funding from the US. But now this funding is no longer there. This means these programs are going to be gone. That means these children, some of them will never see better. Some of them will just die on the spot. So as we go, I will tell you more about what we're doing, but this is a summary of what our organization is doing. Our centers are 2 centers. We have one in a place called Rome, and we have one in the central laboratory, which is Cuba. And we are supporting these women that have come out of war zone and their families. Thank you. Sure. If you want to know more about what I'm doing, this is the brochure. When you leave after the program, it's going to be at the left-hand side. Then you can grab on to learn about our work. Okay.
Well, thanks so much, Betty. It's great to see you again. And thanks to David and the Darfur Coalition for your unyielding commitment to human dignity. I have to tell you all just very quickly that Pittsburgh was my second home as a kid. We have cousins all over the place, Blocks, and Trona Heights, Oakland, East Liberty. I learned to play basketball at PA. I learned to play football in the lawn in front of the Cathedral of Learning at Pitt. And 15 years ago, I was doing some visiting professor thing at Pitt, and my father's a ghost paid me a visit. It's really happened. Ripley's, believe it or not. But remarkable phenomenon led to a lot of interesting insects. Now that I've established my bona fides as a total crackpot, I will answer your question today. I just wanted you all to know how deeply embedded Pittsburgh is in my heart. So I was very happy to hear from David that you were organizing this. I first went to Africa 40 years ago now. I started in humanitarian aid and then developed projects and human rights efforts, and peace negotiations, and constituency building in support of greater engagement on all these different agendas. But 30 years in, 10 years ago, it all seemed somewhat fruitless, frankly, because what I felt was the elephant in the room was largely being ignored or unaddressed. And that elephant in the room, in my humble opinion, is what is known as the phenomenon of kleptocracy, literally ruled by thieves. Another term for it is state capture, in which governing institutions are hijacked and repurposed for private gain. And in all the countries that I have worked in or lived in over those 30 years, some variant of kleptocratic rule was undermining, subverting all of the amazing efforts at development, both local and international. Small networks of people and companies will be fabulously enriched while conflicts were intensifying, while governments will be becoming more autocratic, and the suffering of people was deepening. So we started something called the Century. We hired investigators to follow the dirty money and gather evidence of money laundering and other financial crimes by people who were profiting from human misery. And we turned that evidence over to governments and to banks and pressed for action. We believe that unless the powerful financial incentives are altered away from massive corruption and human rights abuses, why would things change? And since the wheels of international justice grind so slowly to make really enough of an impact, we thought that we created financial costs rather than legal costs, financial costs to kleptocratic behavior, financial costs to profiting from war and dictatorship. We could at least take the first step towards moving towards a more democratic future. But of course, the world is moving in the opposite direction quite fast. We now must worry about openly brazen kleptocratic behavior right here in the United States. We therefore, I think, have to reconstruct a new rationale for what a future foreign aid program or institution might look like that could rise from the ashes of USAID, I think. In some ways, we've learned so much about how to do development effectively over these last decades. But in other ways, we've gone backwards from where we were 40 years ago when I first started. But it's organizations and people like the ones we've heard from tonight, like folks like you all in this room, that allow me to feel a bit of optimism, frankly, about the next 40 years. So thanks all of you for coming out and for caring about these issues, for believing in the possibility of a better future for our world.
Thank you. Nick, and I want to come back to you. We're having this conversation, and for you, this is part of your work, but it's also your life. This is personal. What are you seeing as some of the real life threats from these cuts that maybe we aren't talking about enough?
Thank you so much, Ms. Cruz. What we're seeing, I categorize it in three different categories. Number one, what we're seeing immediate effect of children dying from hunger, people dying from preventable diseases. So many programs being cut off, programs that are supporting women being closed down. Category number two, we're seeing a generation, this is in the case of Sudan, we're seeing a generation that is perishing. Kids don't go to school because of the war. This war has been going on for a year plus. These kids are not going to school. These mothers are dying during childbirth. Men that are dying in senseless war. So you see the death here is you cannot balance. Category number three is the social part that has been destroyed. People have been fragmented. The people of Sudan will never be the same for a very, very long time. I grew up in Sudan before independence. So Sudan was my country for a very long time, until we broke away. So seeing what is happening now in Sudan, is very, it hurts me a lot, because Sudan is come down as well. And to see children die like that, to see women being helpless, to see people that are sick from the small diseases that can be prevented and they're dying, seeing clinics being closed down, people that have diabetes, people that have HIV, they don't have to die because of that. But now, the program has shut down everything. You will see these people dying in the near future. So, to me, I think the world needs to do better. We are now talking about what is happening in Sudan a lot, but I think we, as humans, we all believe in humanity. I think each and every one of us need to take a responsibility to say that what is happening in Sudan is terrible. It can be addressed, it can be changed. These people don't have to die senselessly like that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts in terms of what are we not talking enough about in this moment with the USAID cuts?
Got some thoughts. So on Sudan specifically, and I do think it's worth pointing out, and it is a full-blown massacre right now in fashion. Satellite imagery is taking up piles of bodies and blood-stained dirt. So you can see this from space. It's really a full abandonment of the people of Darfur by the international community. It's been going on for some time. It's really culminating right now. So it's just to be talking about Sudan in this moment. It's difficult, tragic for people who Sudanese and not South Sudanese, but people who dedicated a lot of their lives to trying to make Sudan and South Sudan a better place. I think with the U.S. aid's evisceration by the Trump administration, you can't overstate the importance of how much money and funding has been lost. But I think more than that, what's been lost with USAID's demise and with the kind of ratcheting back of our diplomatic work overseas to resolve conflicts like this is just a loss of U.S. leadership on Sudan and South Sudan. This was a values-based U.S. foreign policy. This was a foreign policy that was the foreign policy that led to the peace talks that ended the war in Sudan, that allowed the separation of South Sudan, that continued on to deal diplomatically with crises that popped up here and there, efforts to support a civilian government in Sudan that emerged out of the revolution in the late 2010s. All of that was really based on the U.S. government, in some respect, pushed by the citizens, particularly evangelicals and youth in Darfur, to care about Sudan and to throw its weight behind humanitarian programs, development programs, and diplomatic work. And I think here, it's also the loss of expertise. When I joined USAID in 2003 as a young person interested in Sudan and the conflict there, because I'm a bit of a conflict junkie, it was like the best place to nerd out on Sudan, because you had people who've been working on these issues on the ground for decades, and people who, even though they worked in technically development or humanitarian work, were practically involved in the diplomatic process because their expertise was so deep. There's one individual in particular, Roger Winter, who worked at USAID when I was there. I spent time with him, but he was known for kind of being a development or humanitarian diplomat. He did more than just write checks and do programs. He understood these places and he worked to create solutions. The other thing I would say is, with USAID broadly, and it's with Sudan and South Sudan, but also with Yemen, with Syria, with Myanmar, anywhere there's a crisis, when the U.S. government is making policy, in an ideal situation when the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor are not the same person that they are now, you have something called the interagency process, which is where the White House, its job is to convene all of the cabinet agencies at senior levels and make decisions about policy. And who's in that room matters, because the Defense Department is going to argue from its own perspective, the Treasury Department is going to argue from its own perspective, the State Department. USAID was the voice in the room that was speaking about the things that I care about. That's why I wanted to work there. That was standing up for human rights, that was standing up for human dignity, that was calling out the hypocrisy, frankly, of U.S. policy in certain places and willing to speak truth to power in those meetings. And when you remove that entity, that voice, that, we didn't win all our battles in the interagency, but at least we were in the room, at least we were making the case, and in many instances we were able to affect policy, to make a more humane policy, to make a better policy. When you lose that voice, you lose, I think, one of the drivers behind a foreign policy that could be more values-based, certainly than what we're seeing now. And I wouldn't necessarily say that the Biden administration foreign policy was terribly values-based, but damn it, we made the case every day in those rooms. We made the case, and now that voice is gone.
What about the response as it relates to emergency response for USAID? What can we comment, especially in light of the recent hurricanes and just what's...
Yeah, I'll speak briefly on that. I mean, the United States was the leader in the world in humanitarian response. When there was a major natural disaster, a major conflict, the expectation was that the United States, because of its values-based leadership, would step up. And in many ways, our humanitarianism stretched far beyond geopolitics. We responded to an earthquake in Iran. We built a field hospital in Iran to help the Iranian people weather the horrors of an earthquake in Baton. I think that was 2004. USAID deploys to humanitarian response in places that aren't necessarily our friends, and we do that because we care about people, or at least that's what I used to think about this country. What's happened now is, with the loss of USAID and the bringing over of some former USAID staff and some program money to the State Department, there's still the ability to respond, but we're not leading the response. When you had a $10 billion humanitarian assistance budget, you can use that to leverage other donors to give money. Right now, by destroying USAID, we've created a permission structure for other donors to give less. And so it's not as if the USAID left the sea and the Europeans are like, oh, well, you better step in. The Europeans are like, great, we don't have to spend as much because they're not offering us spending more money. And we can do what Trump says and spend more money on defense. And in very practical terms, with something like the flooding, the hurricane that's happening now in the Caribbean, it's devastating. I think the images out of Jamaica are likely to get much worse. We have deployed a team there, which is good, but it's just not as robust. It doesn't have the resources. It doesn't have the leadership in Washington, to really drive a global response to a regional disaster. And so, I think that what we're likely to see is a far less effective, a far less nimble, and a far less competent, frankly, response to this emergency and all. Because we've just lost so much expertise. And last thing I'll say, and I should have mentioned this earlier, we don't talk a lot about our local staff. USAID's, the missions were staffed by local people from those countries. And many of these folks were like the best of the best agronomists, the best public health folks. All those folks lost their jobs too. And so not only have we kneecapped our own ability and our own expertise, we've also kind of sent those folks who have really helped USAID accomplish its mission. When it did accomplish its mission, we've also abandoned them.
Thank you, Carl. We've covered a bit on the harm that has come from this events in USAID, and John, in your opening remarks and Ivan's story as well, there's a signal to what rebuilding could look like. We are in the thick of this challenge right now, but I really want to pick back up on that thread of rebuilding a bit further, reimagine what would that look like. And again, you started to signal to that, but can you speak more on what kind of foreign aid would be possible going forward? What kind of assistance would garner support from both sides, from Republicans and Democrats, that would allow for future aid?
I want to build on a little bit of what Colin really insightfully pointed out. USAID is incredibly successful at ameliorating or even preventing famines. Famines, when there's mass starvation, this is the biggest failure of the world, isn't to not be able to prevent such a thing. But USAID has a history of being able to do that. We need to tell that story, I think, as we attempt to rebuild or build a new rationale for future foreign assistance. We need to talk about how little it costs to save lives, how it helps American farmers, how it helps American entrepreneurs and businesses, because there has to be some self-interest for large blocks of key constituencies to go along. And it provides an element of soft power that we can completely just give it away, ceded the ground to China over the last 9 months. For example, from 2020 to 2023, there was a massive drought in East African Horn. Have you heard about that success story? I'm not surprised you haven't. I barely heard about it. The U.S. led a family prevention response that saved between 2 and 4 million lives. Colin would have been at the center. It seems to have cost, when all is said and done, about $2 billion. That's an incredibly cost-effective, life-saving operation with little to no hurdles. We need to rebuild, I think, that last resort support from the U.S. government. It's deeply rooted in what we perceive to be American values that we can't concede just because of what's happened over this course of these last months. They're written right there on the Statue of Liberty forever. Foreign aid is the most essential in medical emergencies, in conflict situations, desperate poverty. How to keep people alive, what a basic question that USAID did incredible work. I spent 40 years thinking about and working on the other side of it, long-term structural reforms, development, long-term development, major investments in good governance. And now, given the political winds and where they're shifting, maybe it's time just to refocus more simply on famine prevention, on stopping epidemics. I think a bipartisan coalition, if not consensus, could be rebuilt in support of countering starvation and mass death. And I'll say just another word about the flip side of that coin. I'd also argue that we ought to relentlessly go after the corruption that fuels conflict and famine. The Gen Z protests, mass protests that are occurring throughout Africa and around the world over these last few months are part of a rejection of kleptocratic governments. Some local organizations, local media, and social media highlighting the evidence of corrupt rulers and their international collaborators, and that puts fuel in the engine of local-led change, and that's where I get some hope. Remember, massive capital flight is flowing out of these countries. Billions of dollars a year. While we used to send billions of dollars in aid, billions of dollars were flying out in these corrupt networks. And this is where the future of development will, I think, has a chance of unfolding. As the proceeds of this illicit financial activity flows through the international banking system. These are the local resources that could power local land development in the future. That is where I think U.S. efforts could potentially have the biggest bang for the buck in the future, where we have far fewer resources for development and foreign aid. So fighting for specific efforts to counter those illicit financial outflows would be the second priority, which for after just basic prevention of starvation.
Thank you. We're going to move into audience questions in a moment, so this is your cue to write your questions on your note cards that you got already registered if you haven't done that yet. Brian will be walking with them down the aisles, so please raise up your hand, hand it to him, and he'll make sure that we get those, and we'll try to make our way through as many as possible. Niakan, one locally focused question that we received in advance of tonight's program is that this global crisis has largely gone uncovered by our mainstream media, as John was pointing to. This is also obviously taking place locally with our local news coverage. How can we engage Pittsburgh or cities like us in understanding the implications of ending USAID and finding ways to support our global community, given the work that you've done on the ground, organizing, mobilizing? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, thank you so much, Eddie. I want to agree with the two gentlemen that America must be the biggest brother, taking care of the whole world. Now seeing all this aid go away, the whole world the big brother has died, basically, I'm sorry to say. Because whenever there is something happening in the world, the United States will come in very fast, not really very fast. They'll be the biggest donor for everything, whether it be developmental projects, health projects, united in the developing one. And now to see all of this go away, we felt left alone behind. We felt alone. So I would encourage you, the people of Pittsburgh, that stand with the world. Please do not forget the world, because right now the globe is feeling that America has turned their back away and everything is falling apart. I know there's good in here. Please visit your representatives, visit Dave Mohammed, he's part of the foreign house. Pressure, let them be a part of the policy making then. If not, let us reverse the decision, because the whole world right now is hurting. It's never too late to fix what has been done. We understand that there is a reason behind the decision of cutting the aid, but the world is really dependent on the United States. So many countries are trying to chip in, but not compared to what the United States can do. So please, create an awareness. Like some of you who came in tonight, maybe you didn't know what was happening before. Now you have heard that the rest of the world is hurting. Go out there, create awareness, talk to your representatives, create some rallies where you can highlight what is happening. You can visit websites. For example, there is website Sudan, called Sudan Initiative. You can go there and take an action. See what they're doing about what's happening around the world. And you'll be making a good contribution in the world. That is the information that I can give you.
Thank you, very call. Yes, yes.
I fully agree on engaging Congress. One of the cruelest ironies of Doge was that, this is a Congress that is basically subservient to this administration. And if this was an administration that actually had any kind of a clue on what it wanted to do differently on development assistance, how it wanted to reform, it could have gotten through whatever legislation it wanted to do foreign assistance differently. That's not what they wanted to throw out the woodshed, which is what Elon Musk did. So this was not an administration, and sadly Congress, during the last Trump administration, which is that Congress station stepped up. Trump wanted to cut a lot of aid last time. Lindsey Graham, amazingly, doing what he is now, really stood the line on the Hill and others and made sure the funding cuts that were proposed in Trump budgets to humanitarian and development assistance were limited at best. This time around, it's obviously a very different case. But to make the point, whatever comes next, and I hope we talk about that a little bit more, whatever comes next in terms of what U.S. foreign assistance is going to be shaped by legislation and code. And so engaging members of Congress now and basically saying, okay, you advocated your responsibility, now what's really, excess deaths, which could be low, I think, happening, wanting to have a claim, have an injury, because these aren't people that appear to have one and that continue to be oppressed.
Thank you. You've spoken, Colin. I'm going to go back to you before turning to the questions, and this is open to each of you. We certainly hear, understand as the stories that have been shared tonight in dire circumstances, the urgency of what is at stake, what is changing. I know we were chatting a bit. You also mentioned some resiliencies that's taking places around. Can either of you or who would like to go share any stories of bright spots, of possibility, of inspiration, of motivation to people clay?
Sure. I think I'll look up what you hope I was jumping. There was a great story in the New York Times the other day, which I think really encapsulates the spirit of people who've been affected by these cuts. There was a hospital south of Mogadishu in Somalia, with the USAID collects the hospital. He basically forced to close that same day. You need to understand, it wasn't this sort of gradual, well, let's close some programs. The administration issued a stop work order. That meant that even NGOs, partners that had received money that had HIV/AIDS drugs in the clinic on the shelf could not hand those out to people who had been coming for the past 10 to 15 years to get them. It's just extraordinarily cruel. But this hospital in Mogadishu, the local staff at the hospital essentially, banded together and were able to reopen the hospital. It's now functioning, doesn't have quite the capacity it used to have, doesn't have the funding it used to have, but it's working. And I think to what talked about earlier, doing more with less means doing more with local actors. It's true that USAID has had its issues, right? I mean, if you work at a grocery store, you probably have an idea on how to make it more efficient. At a $40 billion agency, I'm pretty sure everyone in USAID has an idea of how to make it more efficient. And working to try to do more locally was difficult because there was a whole industry in the United States that's really built up to gobble up USAID money, to make profit off that, and to do projects overseas. When I was at USAID, we had a goal of doing 25% local funding. It was really difficult to reform in that type of environment. What we have now is an opportunity. I mean, it's horrible that we ended up with the opportunity in the way that we did. We had an opportunity to build back a system that I think can be more reliant on local dollars, local know-how. As I said earlier, the lifeblood of USAID initiatives was our local staff. And those are the people that I think we should be reaching out to try to build a new system that would empower local staff, local governments, in case the work ever needs are responsible, to do the work that maybe a U.S. company is doing local.
Yeah.
So when people organize and believe in their cause, like the Pittsburgh Darfur Coalition, efforts like that, and press to change, you don't always succeed. The Darfur situation, of course, is a very sad one and continues to plummet, spiral. But there are many cases where organizing like that Darfur Coalition here in Pittsburgh has succeeded and helped support change in the world. And I'm just going to give you 3 quick examples because it's important, I think, if we're talking about bright spots. We just need to know that it's not fruitless, it's not worthless to spend their time and energy on a cause they believe in. First example, very quickly, is the example of apartheid South Africa. And most of you know it. The system of codified racial discrimination that existed in South Africa was the object of a major people's movement around the world. Students, folks like us in this room, worked tirelessly, got arrested in front of the embassies, boycotted products, wrote letters, went to demonstrations. And I had the opportunity, had the honor working with Nelson Mandela on the Burundi peace process. And he told me a few times, we would talk, in lots of downtime in the middle of these negotiations, and he would say, you don't understand. We were in Robben Island, in prison, and the guards would bring little notes and stories and things like that from the outside world because they sympathized with him, maybe not the cause, but him. And he would learn about groups like this working on the South Africa, halfway around the world in the United States and Europe. And he and his colleagues who were in prison with so much hope from this and to help sustain them in those long, dark times. And the change that was wrought as a result of the protests and the efforts was enormous for South Africans in 1994. The second case is the Blood Diamonds one we've all heard of. 3 wars in West Africa, in West and Southwestern Africa, were in part driven by the illicit trade in diamonds coming out of Sierra Leone, Liberia, Angola. And an international effort, a lot of students, a lot of faith-based groups like this, worked tirelessly to publicize our demand for these precious stones, creating massive human misery in Africa. And it led to some massive changes in the way that diamonds was procured in the international markets and led to the end of those, helped lead to the end of those wars. And the third case is one that Colin mentioned at the beginning, the 60-minute episode that you saw of Cristiano Ronaldo in the Lord's Resistance Army, the militia group that was responsible for what I think was at the time the highest rate of child abductions in the world. And students in the United States began to organize in response to this. And I remember many times going into congressional offices, and even Secretary Quinn, they would talk about their kids as their grandkids, telling them they had to do something about what was happening in northern Uganda and the other countries that Colin mentioned as a result of the Lord's Resistance Army abuse. And over time, tremendous commitment from governments in the region, civil society groups, and the United States government led to a complete, I would say, a rendering of that organization almost meaningless. Went from thousands and thousands of forced recruits to a small band of people hiding in the forest in either Congo or CAI, very few. An incredible success story that almost no one knows. We hear about invisible children and some of the stories that went on there. But the end game, the end result was the entire third of northern Uganda had been displaced, and they're now back living in their homes and living relatively normal lives, reconstructed. This is a result of activism. This is a result of people here in this country taking a stand on something halfway around the world. Most people that are involved in these efforts never even been in most of the places, and saying this is wrong. We got to do something. So things look bleak right now. They look really bleak. But all of us, if we stay the course, keep our hearts in the game, and keep hacking away, major things, major changes can happen. So don't give up.
It's not resolved. Joseph Kony is still at large, but this was also not discussed in a very effective use of U.S. military engagement and partnership with a partner military, the Ugandans, and U.S. intelligence, which at the time was focused on finding Joseph Kony and the LRA and helping Uganda limit it. And this is a group that is found terrorized millions and millions of people, committed horrific atrocities. There's no batting this base. U.S. military intervention, very small scale. I think we never had more than 150 troops on the ground and needing an advisory role. But this is the kind of work that we can do when we think creatively about us all problem and put resources against it. And that needs leadership from the White House as well as on.
Thank you for that. So one of the first questions that we received has to do with partnerships and whether or not we're seeing any successful partnerships between the private sector and local NGOs stepping in to throw this gap.
We are not seeing a lot of partnership happening because I think with the shifting of the funding, a lot of big funders, they have changed. They have shifted their priorities into what is best for them. So what we're seeing is that big organizations or big countries like Europeans and so on, they are not filling the shoes of the United States. We would want more countries to shift in if the United States is not going to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, but we're not seeing it. So there is a gap that needs to be filled somewhere.
Colin, you want to talk about Aurora? Isn't that a great example? Would you say?
Yeah. Well,
Or are you guys on? Go ahead.
I mean, private sector. I mean, one, it would take McKenzie, it would take the Melinda Gates and McKenzie Scott. I mean, it would take them. This is a $40 billion U.S. agency, right? So there's no private sector or philanthropy solution to that. Now, there's a number of philanthropies have stepped up and are trying to support projects that were, or are supporting projects that were shut down by aid. But that's philanthropy. The private sector is a different story. I mean, the private sector, they actually need the U.S. government agency to engage with to help them spend their money or help them. We at USAID, one of the things that we did in my 4 years was we really tried to build bridges with the private sector to try to leverage something we were doing in partnership with them. One example, we did a program in Tanzania with a local phone company called M-Mama. It was basically Uber for pregnant women who didn't have a ride to the hospital and give birth. Extraordinarily successful. We saw maternal mortality rates drop. And it was based on a partnership with a phone company. It was like, hey, we have these, we could set this up and you can help pay for it, or you have the expertise. And, and it was it was private sector working with local government, the Tanzanians, and working with a donor in USAID. If you take the donor out of the equation, I think you just have a harder time making those connections for the private sector. And then you've got organizations that are not affected by it, or that we're taking money or a lot of money from USAID. MSF was mentioned, Doctors Without Borders. They continue to operate, but in my organization, Aurora, we're fully privately funded, and so we don't have to worry about it. The concern, though, is that like with the MSF example, they might be able to operate without U.S. funding per se. But what the U.S. was also doing is it was funding the entire infrastructure that allowed these places to, like the pipelines, the supply chains for HIV/AIDS drugs, for TB drugs, for malaria nets. All of these supply chains were basically wiped out with a stroking pen. And that all needs to be rebuilt. So I've got a doctor who we work with, he runs a hospital. He runs the only referral hospital in the Nuba Mountains in Sudan. It's a hospital for 2 million people. I talked to him 6 weeks after USAID was destroyed, and he said, I don't know where I'm going to get HIV/AIDS drugs and TB drugs, and if my patients don't get them, their treatment is useless. The treatment basically is useless. Like if you don't get your TB drugs on time, that's not going to work. And he ended up having to, at extraordinary expense, he had to source all that medicine from basically the drug companies themselves instead of drawing on a pipeline of subsidized drugs that had been coming and allowing him to offer that treatment. So, I think it's, we're in a difficult spot, but I think the key is thinking about how to build back new systems, new infrastructure that really takes advantage of the local expertise that drives and was driving, frankly, allowed USAID to work to begin because of our extraordinary local staff.
The next question is about the future and the rebuilding. So it is no secret that USAID had major issues with sustainability of its projects. If USAID returns in 4 years or another new agency is established, do you foresee the same sustainability issues? And this is directed to John. Oh.
Go ahead, Mr. You've been deep in that for a long time. I defer to the expert on.
Yeah, I think this is the big debate that's playing out right now in terms of what happens next. I think there is a very deep concern that the status quo of large UN agencies, big bureaucracies, big international NGOs, and then a kind of for-profit. They're called Beltway bandits. That's what we refer to them as, and they're companies that kind of hoover up government money for profit. That was a structure that was in place that I think is going to be, I don't think that's going to come back. I hope. The concern is that the sort of forces is the conservative, not conservative politically, but conservative in the sense that they want to preserve what we have at the United Nations, at big NGOs, in these companies, are just kind of trying to redouble the same thing maybe on a smaller scale, versus taking this moment as an opportunity and thinking about how to do development with more local input, with more partnerships with responsible governments, which appear to be fewer and fewer these days, but still they're out there. And more really devolving kind of decision-making about resources down to the national and local level. The critique of USAID, and I think a critique about the sustainability front, is that these are economists in Washington and Brussels and London making decisions about, what fertilizer farmers in the livelihood should be using. And yeah, when I say that, it does sound ridiculous. So you do have to get to a place where it's about local inputs and local ownership of programs more than it had been. And I'm hopeful that is where we are going, simply because the resource in question, we will not have the kind of money that we had, in the good old days, when even then we didn't have enough. I mean, UN appeals in every country are underfunded every year. But they could appeal and say we need, $2 billion to mount a humanitarian response in 2025 in Yemen, and donors will pony up and they'll get 1.2, 1.3. So that was the status quo. It was already less, and so I think that to saving more lives with less money is just going to require a very different way of thinking about it. And I think there will be there is already enough pushback from countries that have traditionally received a lot of assistance in saying, okay, we don't trust you anymore because you just walked away from us in the business, right? And two, if you want to come back, it's going to have to be on some different terms. And I'm hopeful that governments that receive assistance will use this as an opportunity to try to negotiate new terms of the road, and frankly, to leverage the United States against other partners and other donors. Because, as John said, other actors are stepping in. We didn't send a response team to the Myanmar earthquake. The Chinese did. They were there right away. And these are the types of battles that we are going to lose unless we figure out how to get back in the game much more cost-effective and efficient.
John, how would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so I do agree with the comment that the structure may not work for you, but there is an opportunity for foundation, foundations. There's little that you can do. I'm sure you're not going to fail what the U.S. can do, but private foundation out there, you can do little that will make a difference in these people's lives, in the rest of the country's life. So don't underestimate the power of what you can do. Just because the U.S. aid is gone, that doesn't mean none of people like you cannot do something. You can make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting over the next 20 years, really, because this is such a shock to the system here. I was looking at my notes. I found a quote from Adam Tooze I really find very fascinating all the time. He said, "The age of a politically neutral, universally endorsed development agenda is over." And I think the aid cuts to end of USA, and as Colin mentioned, it's not just America, because Europe has been sliding back. The Brits, a number of other Germans, some of the countries have reduced their foreign aid budgets quite dramatically over the course of the last few years. This is a massive wake-up call to governments and local communities around the world. It's a reminder that they really have to take charge of their own development futures, because they're not going to be able to rely on this incredibly unreliable American-European sort of development complex that existed for the last number of decades. And leaders in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have a chance to build something new. And those are the ones that want to take the bull by the horns. And they're going to be pushed to do so by the Gen Z and other reform movements that are pushing in those streets to take ownership of their own developed future. And I think it's handled well in some places, and I think this is a critical issue, that it can reestablish or establish, let's say, that critical reciprocity between rulers and ruled. I think one of the things one of the unfortunate byproducts, the unintended consequences of the last 50, 60 years of foreign aid is that it's allowed governments to turn their attention elsewhere because the international aid industry took care of all social welfare. It's built the social welfare safety net, paid for the health distribution systems, all the things we just have been talking about will have been dismantled now over the last 9 months or last year. Were built by the internationalists, and governments could increasingly just focus on security, military and internal security, and not have to worry about the connection with their own people in terms of their social welfare. And that's a really bad outcome that has to be addressed, and the reconnection between the governing and those being governed is going to be crucial. So I think that's an opportunity. I mean, to look at the very small silver lining in a very dark sky. That there's an opportunity now for governments and for local communities to step up in the context of massive lost resources, in the context of death and morbidity and mortality that's going to be staggering over the next 10 years as a result of this shock to the system, the way we do welfare around the world, and how it's going to be rebuilt by governments and local communities in those places is going to determine the future of billions of people's lives.
I'm going to fold these last two questions into one because we're close to time and they're both important. We're talking about local government, local people taking action. One of the questions is, the average American who isn't necessarily globally minded doesn't feel the impact of the USAID cuts. So how can we convey the importance of these programs to people who don't benefit from them? One question, hold that in mind. And the other, take one or both of these. The other comes from students who are in the audience who want to know about starting a career in global health or international development. How is that possible now? What is a pathway? What organizations exist as the government is continuously posing add-ons to do this domestically? The first question was, how can we convey the importance of the programs to people who don't benefit from them? And the second is pathways that they're posing.
I mean, I think there's the one argument, the one thing that sticks in my mind is there's a very strong national security / global health, U.S. public health argument to make. Ebola didn't solve itself, folks, in West Africa. That was USAID and the U.S. military that went out and basically helped those three countries, and some of you are probably not old enough to remember this, but we had a couple of Americans show up in the States with the Ebola virus, and it was a massive national freakout. And there was a meeting in the White House Situation Room in which government officials were briefed that allowed to spread unchecked, the death rate from that Ebola outbreak in West Africa could go well over 1 million and would likely spur far beyond borders. With the destruction of the global, with our public health work, and that includes the people that we were, that were working with local governments to trace individuals that had diseases that could threaten U.S. health, U.S. public health, that infrastructure is gone. And I think, all seeing what happened here during COVID, another possible pandemic when we don't have the systems or the resources in place to identify it early, to combat it on the grounds, and instead we're dealing with it in U.S. hospitals. I think that's a pretty stark move. And then the other one, I just think that there is a balance between certainty here. What kind of country do we want to be? Are we a country that, right now we're a country that puts up food service, right, for its own citizens. So you've got to get to a far different place politically. These issues, when John and I were working together in the 2000s, these were fully bipartisan issues. The LRA issue, the two biggest champions in Congress were Russ Feingold and Sam Brownback, who probably agree on nothing else than that Joseph Koenig is worth the U.S. government's attention. Sudan, bipartisan, is hugely bipartisan, right? So we're only 20, 50, 10 years removed from this. And so
even a couple of years ago, Rubio was like one of the main. So pretty lose the name. But he would have worked across the aisle to do things on terms of international development. It's unbelievable.
No, okay, but I think that's it's important. It's important to remember that this wasn't. We didn't have to worry about bipartisan politics with this stuff. We could say that a Republican administration might not do it as well as we would like, but that certainly was critical of Democratic administrations, and we threw flames at whoever that wasn't doing what we thought they should be doing, and now it's just so heated, this discussion, and like everything else. So it's
Thank you.
Any of this? Yeah, I would treat this as a national security. Now we're talking about immigration issues. Now think of these people that will be coming into the United States because the programs that keep them outside the United States not exist anymore. So there will be a lot of displacement everywhere around the world. And that's why will people be looking for good life. People will be coming to the United States. So we should think of that as not benefit for the people that are outside of the United States, but rather as a national security for the United States. Because diseases that I was talking about would be coming in. Because those diseases were contained outside of the United States. But when you don't take care of this outside of the United States, they won't come in. So that you should treat it as a security problem.
Take a bonus out of CDC at the same time, you're really hurting yourself. Like you simultaneously kneecapped our global health and our domestic health capacity and expertise. It just it's scary.
I think I want to double down what Mirkan just said about national security. There are arguments that can be made on a number of fronts for why spending and engaging on international issues is a tremendous national security and morals in the United States. And just today I saw Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Jim Risch, say that he thinks that the main militia causing the hell in Darfur, the Rapid Support Forces, should be designated a foreign terrorist organization, so making a national security case to his own party's administration that he should be taking much more serious action against this entity that is causing so much death and destruction. But I'd like to go take a step back to answer your question, Betty, also by saying that at the heart of how we might make a dent in people's consciousness about the importance of these things that we're talking about tonight is a very basic thing, and everybody has the capacity to do it in this room, is to tell stories. And the stories we got from the first three speakers are so it's so important to hear their personal stories. Because you look at, and you heard from David about Nick Kristoff, his calls, and how, literally every one of them has an incredibly dramatic story about someone who has been deeply, deeply impacted by, or some group of people that have been deeply impacted by the egg hunt. So I can tell them stories of what is happening out there is one way for people to connect heart to heart, because we are human beings and we're affected much more by someone's human story than we are by numbers and statistics. So keeping that in mind, but also telling the stories of those that are affected in the United States and the farmers that are, as they cut all of the massive humanitarian response systems that externalize much of our surplus grain. Now the farmers will have
Shippers.
yes,
And U.S. shippers.
all these downstream businesses. Right, you could go on for hours talking about this. The companies that are making medical devices. There are so many different food processors. So many different American interests in global engagement, supported by U.S. spending. Pennies, not pennies. That's too large a number. Sub-pennies, whatever that is, of our national budget, underwriting huge economic sector in the United States and saving lives and making lives better around the world. So I think ultimately storytelling is a central part.
Just did gibberish recognize that you declared the RSF a terrorist group, that the UAE would be therefore a state sponsor of terror?
That's a good. See, we'll help them learn that too. That'll be our press release.
Just because if you don't know, the United Arab Emirates, our close ally, is fully funding and backing the militias in Sudan that's currently slaughtering people. They're backing them with sophisticated weapons, intelligence, mercenaries, which they're paying for from Colombia. So, again, another area in, the values-based relationships around the world.
And my last point on that, just to go back and forth here and footnote each other's points, but this is really to the Pittsburgh Darfur Coalition, is where some of the groups that, and maybe some of you know this, some of the groups, and you mentioned Esther, and other folks like that, activists around the country, are developing a campaign that's going to focus on the United Arab Emirates and its relationships with some of the sports leagues and teams around the world. We'll start at the NBA and it's the Emirates' support for the in-season tournament in NBA as a means of reputational damage, frankly. I mean, we're going to go after the United Arab Emirates by going to the leagues and the teams that are benefiting from these these governmental sponsorships. I'm saying, really? The NBA stood up for civil rights? Part of that is Bill Russell and those guys who were on the front lines of the civil rights movement and have stood up for racial justice domestically are one step removed from supporting genocide and race-based genocide. This is what is coming. So I join the movement that we're going to try to build to go after these supporters of horrible conflict and atrocities in Sudan.
And John has a full piece on this in Foreign Policy magazine, and it's called Sudan, the Congo, and You. And you speak to it at length. There is so much wealth of insight, so much that you have shared. I appreciate the call to action and the hope and the fact that we are in this together. You've given us so much to think about and do. You could be here till midnight. Yes. So everyone, please join me in thanking this incredible panel.
And thank you to all of you. Thank you. It's an incredible work. And to all of you, the talent who brings that and let's work together. Thank you so much. Be safe. Have a good night.
Well done, guys. I'm
Stay.
How about you? What do you hear for you?